Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this February 17th, 2016 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony, and you're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can listen to my show every evening from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. That's on First Amendment Radio. Or you can catch the show at 11 a.m. Pacific Time. And if you can't do that, go to my website at arcticbeacon.com. That's arcticbeacon.com. You can get a lot of good articles going back almost 10 years. Wow, how time flies. And we're back live today. First couple days this week, I played some reruns because I wanted to feature the Tony Alamo Ministry again. I do this all the time because I really believe it's an important story regarding the state of our country, the loss of our freedoms. I'm talking about freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of speech, etc., etc. It no longer exists. It exists if you keep your mouth shut, so to speak. It exists if you follow the Vatican line, so to speak. But, you history people out there, all you history teachers at all these universities, and all you politicians, and all you pastors at all these evangelical churches and ecumenical churches who are all bowing down to Rome, just watch out. If you dig too deep in history, you just might find out the truth. And you don't want that to happen, do you? Oh, no. We can't really get at the truth. And as one of the CNN reporters yesterday said, well, let me just say today what I want to do. I'm going to talk a little bit about how the Tony Alamo Ministry is important. Then I'm going to get into a guy by the name of Fr Edmund Walsh, W-A-L-S-H. W-A-L-S-H. Fr Edmund Walsh. He's no longer with us. However, he's instrumental in many of the things that happened in World War II, and many of the things that are going on today, he laid the groundwork for. Georgetown University professor, and he started the School of Foreign Service there at Georgetown, which should be called the White House number 2. But anyway, we'll get to that. But I did want to say this, that we have 9 members of the Supreme Court, right? One passed away recently, Justice Anton Scalia. And then, of course, on the internet, a whole bunch of articles came out that this was a hit job, that he's been killed, etc., etc. And then, of course, CNN comes on and says, everybody that's a conspiracy theorist, everybody, these people are just crazy. Is really paraphrasing what they say. And basically the message was, believe us or you're a conspiracy theorist. Well, let me look at this from 2 points of view. There are, I look at the internet from 2 ways. There's good information, and then there's entertainment purposes only information. Now, I don't agree with people who, everybody who dies is not, according to many people on the internet, there's always some conspiracy behind it. Now, of course, there are a few people that I've mentioned that that lays a good idea or groundwork that they were not suicided, etc., etc. But once you start calling everybody who dies killed by the Vatican-led New World Order, then there's problems. And I think a lot of people on the internet who do these stories are actually working for the Vatican to give people a bad name who are really looking for the truth behind certain deaths like Gary Webb, the journalist, and others. Now, for example, let me give you an example. If I died tomorrow, and then a story came out that Greg Szymanski died of a heart attack, etc., I know that everybody that knows me and the internet would start saying that I was killed. Now, unfortunately, if I do die tomorrow, I'm not going to be able to tell you what happened. But the point is, please, somebody out there, look into it. And don't just go off the cuff and say that I was killed. I could die of natural causes too, just like many other people. And we're all going to meet the Grim Reaper one day. But I know because of my background, that's going to get out. And so I don't want to accuse anybody of my death until there's positive evidence. So you let me know what you find out afterwards, and I'll look down from the big sky above to, again, enjoy the party down here. Now, okay, we live in an age of terrorism, right? That's the war we're into now. And let me be clear. we are in a war now, even though it's not declared. Do you have to wait for Congress or the president or somebody to declare war when we are at war? People are at war right now. Now, the question I have is, will you fight for your country even if you know the truth? For example, it's easy to look back at the veterans, and it's easy to even look back at my life when I was almost called into the Vietnam War, and I was in the first lottery. So basically what happened, my number was draftable, and then I went to take my physical, but between the time I took my physical and had to go to Vietnam or into boot camp, they lowered the number so that I never had to go. But because I didn't understand the truth then, I made a decision. There were a lot of people during that period of time running away, going to Canada because they didn't believe in the war. And I wasn't quite sure. I didn't quite believe in the war either. But I know in my mind, if I was called, I would have went. Now, if I would have been here, I don't know if I'd be here today talking about it. But the same question I would ask you. If we are in a war now, what are we doing? Are we doing anything to basically help our country? Help people who are ignorant of the truth? Are we doing anything to help anybody? Now, I'm not saying pick up a gun and start fighting. No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about looking for the truth, spreading information like this, because we are all diplomats. We are not, do you just want to wait for the diplomats from Georgetown University to set the course and direction of your country into another World War III, which they're doing right now? That's what's going to happen. Or are you going to take up your diplomatic stance and tell people exactly what's going on from the point of view that you have, and not sound like a conspiracy nut? Now, is it important that you take up a cause? Yes, you have to have I mean, if we all sit back, here's what they want. When they start spreading all this information on the internet, they want to disillusion you. They want to get you away and say, hey, this country ain't worth marbles. That is not the truth. There are many people in high positions that aren't worth marbles, but the many people in this country who built it up from nothing are worth something. And I know we could start looking back to the Native American situation and everything, but we are not part of that. I don't take responsibility for what these people did 3 generations ago. I think it's appalling. And my heartfelt goes out to the Native Americans right now, the ones that are left. How many are left? I ask you the same question about Poland. Do any of you really care? One of the biggest affronts to this country was when Polish, Irish, and Italian people, I'll just use those 3 examples. Everybody in Italy is a mafia member. Every Irish guy is a drunk. And every Polak is stupid. Now, that's what they wanted to tell you. And the jokes just get going and going and going. But do you realize that do you understand anything about what happened in World War II? I'm sure people do. Do you know what Hitler sold his German people a bag of garbage and told them that Poland was threatening Germany? It was the igniter that gave, and when they took over Warsaw in a very short time, there was huge applause. But the real goal behind that, why did they go into Poland? Well, first of all, Hitler had to get a pact with Stalin, so that ripped Poland apart, and Stalin got the eastern part of Poland. And Germany did all the dirty work. Stalin didn't have to do a darn thing. But the real reason they went in there was because there was an eclectic population of Jews, 3.3 million, the largest in Europe. They, from the beginning, had that in mind, and the Western government knew it back in the late 30s, and we dragged our feet because we were involved in getting this war going, and we only got in at the appropriate time when when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, which we also knew about prior to that, and that was the igniter for us to get in. And the same thing that the German people were told, the American people were told, and we went to war then on 2 fronts. But in the meantime, Poland was ripped apart. The Jewish population, do you realize that they went in there and killed women, children, and anything long before, with our intelligence knowing it, but covering it up? We should have been stopping this war back in the 30s, but we were funding it. They were getting their money through Western banks at the time, covered IG Farben, and all these companies. IBM was working with the Nazis. I mean, to give me a break. This is how they had to fund this war. And Bush, the older Bush, who was a senator, was behind this. So in the back rooms of the Vatican, in the back rooms of Washington, in the back rooms of Georgetown University, this war was orchestrated and sold to each country. Now, the point I'm trying to get at is, if you look at what they did to the Jewish people in Poland, how Warsaw was depicted as an aggressor to Germany when they weren't. They were set up. The German people bought those goods, and guess what? Many people sat there as if it was the status quo, just like we are doing today. And I make an analogy here, the Jewish people there first had their property. First, there were laws passed that took away their businesses, started to take away their property, and then eventually, guess what? Their lives. Shipped off to Auschwitz, shipped off here and there. And all of them, some of the people left early, many stayed because they couldn't believe this would happen. No. And here you have, and just think about this, very wealthy people who built businesses up in Warsaw and all over the place. An eclectic group of Jews, the largest in Europe. And you're living in a house that you work for your whole life. And you don't leave, and then pretty soon the Gestapo comes and takes you out. Now, they lost their freedom of religion long before they were actually grabbed by the Gestapo. They lost it when the laws were starting to pass. Now, I equate that to what's going on today. The Patriot Act, all of these laws taking away our rights, taking away our freedom, building this idea that you're a terrorist if you don't follow the party line. And what happens? Anybody that starts talking about really what's going on behind the scenes, our country being a little bit different than Germany back then, we now understand. There are many people who understand, the Protestant Reformation. What happened? We're talking about Christianity here. We're not talking about Catholicism or paganism or anything like that. We're talking about true Christians who want to practice their faith and worship God here, just as if the Jews back there were doing the same thing in their own way. The powers that be look at you, look at the Alamo ministry, look at all these ministries they're ripping apart, and I've gone through piece by piece telling you how they do it. And it's the same thing that went on prior to them actually grabbing you and putting you in a truck and taking you away, which eventually could happen here. So are we at war? Yes. We've been at war for years. And this ministry shows you exactly the spiritual side of what they're trying to do. The ecumenical movement. Everyone in the camp of Rome. Those that aren't, they seem to get whittled away, don't they, slowly. Same thing with the Jews back in Poland. And then all over, and even in Germany. What about the German Jews in Berlin who stayed? They had the same thing happen to them. And that happened all over Europe. And pretty soon you got a population of Jews that is, they lost their property. And who really thinks about it? Well, look at the Christians now. Look at the people up in Oregon that are losing their property with government regulations and control. You know how much land our United States government owns in the West? It's incredible. That is the same exact thing going on in a different guise. And so what I wanted to mention in this first half hour was that the importance to really pay attention to the Alamo ministry story and to look at really what's happening to good Christians. Then you might have a different idea about how to stand up against them. And maybe we're smart enough to look into history in the past and not allow the same thing to happen. Because I believe even back then, back during the time in the 30s, and when the Third Reich was just getting going, and we've done stories about the Vatican connection to Hitler and how he was picked out by his mentor, which was Pope Pius XII, and all of his Catholic Jesuit statements creating the SS, as he even said it, we modeled it after the Jesuit order and the Gestapo and things like this. Their idea, our military basically has now taken on that kind of approach. We're even having our police officers armed as if it was a military force. Against who? Just the same way that the military force in Germany was against the Jews, they are against not only Christians, but middle class. The middle class who owns land. And so the distinction here, this idea, what they're going to sell you in the elections now, these race war, every whites against blacks. Okay, there exists a problem, but the problem is not just race, and they want you to think that. The problem is they're going to take it from anyone. I don't care who you are. You can be white, black, blue, green. They're going after your land. They're going after your freedoms, and they will get it because you are owned by them. Now, are we at war? Yes. How do we fight them? Can we fight them with arms? No. But we can fight them with the truth, with the courage to stand up for people who are standing up against them. There are people out there that in many different areas are standing up against them. Now, some may be standing up against them in chemtrails. Some may be standing up against them in another area of 9/11 truth. And you know what that reminds me of? One of the reasons the Native Americans were so easily taken apart is because they never united. Now, if you know the story of Tecumseh, he tried to unite the Indian tribes at the end, but it was too late. And I view us the same way in a sense. Think about it. We have people fighting for chemtrails but could care less about the Jesuit order. We have people fighting for 9/11 truth who do not want to get involved in chemtrails. Then we have all these people and groups infiltrating them, so we have not a unified group who can actually stand up for something. Now you can take people like the Alamo Ministry, and I've tried to find people who unify it, put all this stuff together, and then join together. But you see what'll happen is somebody will find something in the chemtrail people they don't like, or they'll find something in the Alamo Ministry they don't like, and so everybody remains separate. And this is how they can, separate and conquer. That's exactly what they did to the Native Americans. Now we're fighting in a different plane here. We're fighting with words, ideas. We're fighting with what we understand about history, and we have to put it all together to ever have a chance to, my goal is always delay them. Delay. And in this half hour, the next half hour, I want to start talking about Edmund Walsh and to show you this connection that the history books will never tell you. This is what I mean. You start, I look back, and if you want to take the whitewashed version, and I always like to start in World War II because it's very pertinent. There's still a few vets around. And then the Vietnam War, which is a different animal, and they started funding that war with drug money. But World War II set the stage for this whole idea today of what's going on and the aftermath, and that was their goal. And if you read just from the point of view that Stalin was in conflict with Roosevelt in the surface and Hitler and the Vatican, if you look on the surface, you'll see that, oh, wow, yeah, we were the good guys then, and they were the bad guys. But behind the scenes, the whole thing was orchestrated, and every leader, Roosevelt sold his bag of garbage to the American people. Churchill sold his. Hitler sold his. Stalin sold his. The Vatican controlling it all. Back then, the same way. They're doing it today. Now, the Jesuits are deeply involved in this, and Father Edmund Walsh, I will show you how he was a broker, how he was not just this, great intellectual priest who started the School of Foreign Service. He has a page on Eisenhower's website to this day when he died. And the reason is because he put Ike there. Yeah, because they needed MacArthur. They needed a patsy. They needed somebody they control, and Ike was the guy and then they gave him the presidency because he did what they wanted. And Walsh was instrumental in picking him. And that's why during that time, there was a huge outrage in the military. How did this guy get the head job in World War II when there were about 100 others that were well more qualified, and there was a big stir. But nobody hears that. Nobody hears about Walsh. Nobody hears about any of this stuff. And I will show you that, in a short half hour, and we may carry it over a little. You can go back to some of my articles. Just to Google Arctic Beacon, Father Edmund Walsh. And you'll see what I mean. Because today, if you look at a Father Dal Oglio, that's D-A-L-L, Jesuit priest, O-G-L-I-O, you'll see he's doing the same thing in Syria as Walsh did back then in Russia, in Baghdad, in Mexico. You will see the same pattern. Now, if CNN gets a hold of this, they're going to say I'm a conspiracy nut. And that's a sign, I'm not saying that Justice Scalia was killed. And in fact, I wouldn't say that until there was positive proof. I'm not a conspiracy nut. But this is factual. Stuff that's uncovered that no one wants to talk about, and that is the difference. And this is what we have to fight for. And if we're ever going to get a little bit back, and what I mean by that is if we're going to get a little pride back, if we're going to get... Somebody's calling me, but I will get them at the break. Maybe they have a question. But if we're ever going to get a little bit of pride back, if we're ever going to get a little bit of our reason for being here, outside of the fact of, I'm not saying, I'm looking at this from a very practical point of view of how to live with this. And my point of view is, by understanding all this, we need to tell people. We need to use this opportunity to help. We are at war, but it's a different kind of war. And I'm not saying, and you hear me many times tell you, I don't profess in overthrowing any government. I don't profess in running away into the woods and becoming a survivalist. I profess dealing with these people head on and speaking facts that are told to you throughout history so it doesn't happen again. We've heard it time and time again. And it is important that we distinguish ourselves from conspiracy theorists and from the mainstream with a unified group, despite some of our differences. And that is the only way that we even have a chance to getting to what they call the, there's a breaking point they look for. If this information that we talk about here ever spread to the masses and people actually are asking questions about these politicians who are running for president now, this would just turn this country upside down. And nothing is more dangerous to them than slowing down their world order, new world order, old world order train, which is headed right for a one world government and a one world order. Yes, sirree. That's what it's doing. And in the second half hour, we're going to take a stroll back in time and talk a little bit about Edmund Walsh and his importance. And I don't think I can do it in 30 minutes. I'm long-winded a lot of times. So we got tomorrow, we got Friday, depending on whether the internet holds up, on whether my technical things hold up, because we are so tied to all this stuff. My God, when's the last time you ever wrote a letter on a piece of paper? I don't want to be in the pencil business, the paper business, or the pen business. I don't know how, in fact, I don't even know if people know how to write anymore. They know how to type and text. But pretty soon, they ain't even going to know how to make, I had good penmanship when I grew up. That's a lost art. Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal, and I promised to get into the connection of Fr Edmund Walsh and World War II, Stalin, Lenin, intrigue going on in Baghdad before that, all this stuff, brokering deals for the United States government and the West. Now, when I wrote these stories back in 2009, someone commented on them, and I'll read this, stating regarding my program, they said, again, this investigative journal is one of the most foremost programs exposing the Jesuit order, as it is the great secret society, as spoken by an author who wrote a book entitled A Glimpse of the Great Secret Society. He wrote it in the late 1800s, and it was a compilation of several articles written by several different men. But the editor refused to put his name onto it because he was afraid that some harm would come to him. The writers of the Encyclopedia Britannica 9th edition, 1875 to 1889, which, by the way, is on the Holy Office of the Inquisition's list of forbidden books. Did you know they still have that? Said that the Jesuits had fomented Franco, the German War. Well, if that's the case, then they used Napoleon III to foment that war. And his wife Josephine was at the feet of the Jesuits continuing. And Napoleon III, having fomented this war, caused it for the Jesuit quest of ultimately destroying Protestant Prussia. So we're going way, way before the Second World War. But the Jesuits had seeking to destroy the Reformation out of Europe, specifically in Germany, because whoever controls Germany controlled Europe. But they sought to destroy Protestant Prussia using France, headed by Napoleon III, who had made a military dictator and emperor in 1852. Okay, so that's a little bit of their intrigue, even going back then, to that time and then World War I. But let's push forward here. And you can go and get that article and this comment, which was well written, and I appreciate all the information he gave. But also, this is what is interesting. Now, talking about Edmund Walsh, let me just ask you some questions here, and then we'll read some of the story, talk about it. If Edmund Walsh was only a harmless school teacher, as I tried to call Georgetown, and that's how they depicted him, as depicted by the Jesuits, how come he was instrumental in establishing diplomatic relations for the U.S. government in Baghdad way back in 1931? How come he personally assisted Plutarco Elias Calles in the formation of the National Revolutionary Party, PNR, ensuring the security and primacy of the Catholic Church in Mexican politics and the party, an alliance that remains unbroken to this day? Of course, all these important questions have never been answered by U.S. leaders in the Vatican. Why? Because it would show, beyond a reasonable doubt, the two entities are working together to destroy America from within, and have been doing it for a very, very long time. Now, a couple things I wanted to mention here. And let's go back to Walsh. I call him a kingpin Jesuit, puppet master for FDR, Stalin, and Eisenhower. Now, if the Vatican and Jesuits are not up to their eyeballs, I'm getting calls all the time. The Vatican and Jesuits are not up to their eyeballs in provoking wars and creating general chaos. Why then did Walsh handpick and place murderer Joseph Stalin into power? Do you believe this happened? Well, the case can be made, folks, that it did. Now, Joseph Stalin and Jesuit Father Walsh are connected at the hip, whether you like it or not. Walsh is the father of Georgetown School of Foreign Service, and most of our diplomats to this day are trained there, Jesuit trained. You know, before looking into Stalin's profile, which I'll do, if I can't get that today, I'll do it another time, it's also interesting to note the Jesuit connection to Stalin and communism is also seen from Stalin's own words in a little-known letter written to the Politburo in 1934. These are things that never appear on the History Channel, or remember that big, huge TV thing they did about 10 hours called The Winds of War? Robert Mitchum, who's a great actor, played the lead role. None of this stuff gets mentioned, but in the letter, Stalin wants to keep the Jesuit name out of the Bolshevik paper and tells leaders to be wary and not to print an article by Engels because it refers in part to the Jesuits. Here is the quote by Engels, which Stalin warns must be kept out of the Bolshevik newspaper. Foreign policy, Engels states, is unquestionably in the realm in which Tsarism is very, very strong. Russian diplomacy constitutes a new kind of Jesuit order, which is powerful enough to overcome when necessary even the Tsar's whims, and while spreading corruption far beyond itself, is capable of stopping corruption in its own midst. Okay, I'll get into how Stalin was trained at Tiflis in Georgia, in Russia. Even though the Jesuits were expelled, they still had certain holdings there. And Stalin was nothing more than a Jesuit priest when you look at his background. I will get to that in a minute. But let's go back to looking at Edmund Walsh a bit, which I did in 2010 as well. Now, I mentioned, did he really handpick FDR, Eisenhower, and these people? Now, I'm sure CNN would call me a conspiracy theorist, but facts lead me to believe that this should be explored. And the question has to be asked, why is he on Ike's webpage? Still to this day. There are a lot of good priests, a lot of good teachers, right? Why him? How could Walsh, the creator of the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown, have had the power to act as the chief consultant to the Nuremberg trial judges in order to keep the Jesuits and the Vatican connection to the Nazis out of the public record, as well as ensuring prominent Nazis were never convicted? Now, fact, when they held the Nuremberg trials, Walsh was the overseer of the judge. He was sent there. Why? He's a good teacher? Or was it to keep the Vatican name out of the record? And was it to ensure that many Nazis that should have been put away weren't put away and ended up in either Argentina, Canada, the United States, etc., etc.? If Walsh was this harmless, I got a picture of him here with MacArthur, together walking. That's not all they did. If Walsh was only a harmless schoolteacher, as depicted by the Jesuits and Georgetown universities as late as 2010 when I called them, how come he was so instrumental in establishing diplomatic relations for the U.S. government in Baghdad way back in 1931? And I mentioned, like I said again, and I should emphasize, how come he was there in Mexico? Of course, all of these important questions never will be answered because it's only conspiracy theories, folks. And it would show beyond a reasonable doubt that what we talk about in this show has the great probability of being true. Furthermore, a good way to get the other side of the story, since the Jesuits and U.S. leaders aren't talking, why aren't could we ask this question at the presidential debates? We would get thrown out. But let's take a closer look at Stalin, FDR, and Eisenhower, profiles kept out of the public record. Okay? Before looking at the profiles of these men, it is also interesting to note the Jesuit connection to Stalin and communism is also seen from Stalin's own words. Remember I said that? Yes. Now, the one thing I want to mention, and I'm going to talk off the cuff here, is Walsh, during the time of the Bolshevik Revolution, Lenin was running look, their idea was to get rid of the Tsar, and to kill Orthodox Christians, which Stalin did a great job. Mass murder. He made Hitler look like a small-time hitman with the way they were killing, not only knocking the Tsar off, but all of the Orthodox Christians. That's what the Jesuit order and the Vatican wanted. They'd get rid of them in Russia and get rid of the Jews in Europe. Now, during the time of the Bolshevik Revolution, Lenin was ahead of it. Lenin really wasn't on the team. He wasn't playing ball with the powers that be. They needed their own man in, and that's where Stalin comes in. He was trained at Tiflis. Might as well call him a Jesuit priest. He spent years there, and every time Stalin, after he was getting his influence and was arrested, or he was on the run from the authorities, he ended up in Tiflis, protected by the Jesuits. That's why he wanted to keep that little quote out of the paper. Now, he was their man, and how would their man get in power? Well, our government sends over Walsh on a mission of food aid. That was the front. He was going over there supposedly it was the Papal Famine Relief Mission, it was called, to aid starving Russians. But that wasn't the reason he went. He went to broker a deal with Lenin to get Stalin, their man, into power. And here's how he did it. Lenin needed money, so Walsh had an open checkbook from the West to fund the Bolshevik Revolution and to get them arms and everything else under the table so that our government couldn't find out, of course. And what better way to do it than to use a priest? going there on the Papal Famine Relief Mission. They do the same thing today with all their little schemes and all their little relief missions all over the world. And Father Dal Oglio, O-G-L-I-O, the guy over there in Syria now, and the Jesuit, is a good example of this. Now, Walsh goes there and says to Lenin, look, you want the money, you got to give Stalin a high position in your revolution. Which he did. He took the money, but he was always wary of Stalin. Always. And there was a rift between them, and basically Stalin killed Lenin before Lenin was going to kill Stalin. And he got the go-ahead from our famous Jesuit general in Poland. Like I always said, there are good Poles and there are bad Poles, just like every other country. Father Ledikowski, the Jesuit general there, gave the go-ahead, kill Lenin before Lenin kills you. So the rise to Stalin was based on the Jesuit order, and he was protected from the beginning, placed there, just as Hitler was placed there by Pope Pius XII. Now, if they're not working on the same team, with their coach being the Vatican and the Jesuits, with Western help, using Father Walsh from America to do this, they didn't go from Rome here. They went right to where the money was coming from, and he was a good cover. Now, if I presented this on a CNN, they call me a conspiracy theorist. Where's the fact? Where's the information? Well, I would say to them, it's pretty hard to get information when you have a secret group working that doesn't want to give you the information, and you guys won't even dig for it because all you are is a puppet mouth of the establishment. That's what I would tell CNN. But, unfortunately, 90% of the American people would believe CNN and not me. That's the state we're in. Now, Walsh, who was he? He was a Georgetown professor of geopolitics and founder of the Georgetown University of Foreign Service, like I mentioned, which he founded in 1919, 6 years before the U.S. Foreign Service itself existed, and served as its first dean. So he had the idea, this is where they train these guys right now. They're all Jesuit trained. Do you think they're ever going to get to the truth? His motivation for doing so came as a result of his experiences at the Versailles Conference of 1919. What was he doing there? In 1922, Jesuit Superior General Ledikowski, like I told you, appointed Walsh to negotiate with Lenin in Russia, remember, to provide emergency financial assistance and the provision that Stalin, and I call him a priest, S.J., was appointed to oversee the day-to-day operations. All right, so there we go. They get their man in there, they kill Lenin, and they're off to the races, killing millions of Orthodox Christians and playing this game, which would come about in the 30s with Hitler and the West, to create World War II, which they did quite well, I might add. Now, let's look a little bit about Walsh before that. In 1931, where was he? Well, in 29, Walsh then personally assisted Plutocro Elias Callas in the formation of the National Revolutionary Party. What's he doing that for? Oh, they'll tell you he was over there giving aid to the poor as usual. But do you realize they take the money from the poor? That's why Mexico's in the same position, worse position today than it was back then. In 1931, Walsh was instrumental in establishing diplomatic relations. For the U.S. government, he was in Baghdad, for God's sakes. One of his most important and influential appointments then was consultant to the U.S. Chief of Counsel at the Nuremberg trials, 1946. Wow, this guy gets around. And if you remember what happened in Baghdad back then, the Jesuits were kicked out of Iraq. After that, very shortly after that, during around this time frame, there were unfortunate airplane accidents, and all the leaders of Iraq were killed. And this was years later. And then that made way for, guess what? It made way for CIA, Catholic intelligence asset, Saddam Hussein. So we have Walsh setting the stage in the 30s, this moving up to Hussein taking over their man again, just like Stalin, just like Lenin. They do the same thing over again. Now they got Obama and every president on their team. That's what makes this disturbing for us, doesn't it? Now, it was Walsh who was instrumental in ensuring the heavy occult-focused symbolism and activities of the Nazis were never recorded in the trials. He was controlling the judge. My question is, why was he there in the first place if you don't believe that? What was he there for? He's just a teacher. They sent him to oversee the Nuremberg trials. Now, even though every single defendant wore dozens of occult symbols on their uniforms and participated in occult-related ceremonies, Walsh also ensured that the key involvement of the Catholic Church was stricken from the official record, with accounts of Catholic priests at concentration camps, regular meetings with cardinals, bishops, and Nazis destroyed or suppressed, and absolutely no mention of Jesuit involvement. Walsh also ensured a number of prominent Nazis were excluded from the trials, none more than Karl Ernst Haushofer, who died in 1946, they say, a German general, geopolitical theorist, and political architect of the Nazi political philosophy. Nothing with him. Haushofer, more than any other German political thinker, influenced Hitler and the Nazis in their European political outlook. Now, let's check the old clock. We don't have much time left. It's we got about 6 minutes. So why don't we do this? There's much more on Walsh. And I'll get to him later because there's a lot of intrigue going on. It really comes to play with Stalin first and then Eisenhower. And you'll see how this all ties together. But unfortunately, I won't be able to do it today. But Stalin was, his name is so long that I can't even pronounce it. But it was changed to Stalin, meaning the man of steel, made of steel. He was born of influential Catholic parents, and his father was successful and relatively wealthy businessman. However, in later biographies, he is variously described as poor, dirt poor, and a violent alcoholic. See, they like to change history. This is where this man of the people came from. He actually came from rich Catholic parents, businessmen, selected by the Jesuit order. Whatever the real truth is, Joseph was accepted into the Catholic Capuchin-run school at Gori. He graduated in 1892. This is all factual records. Why don't we know this? Why doesn't people put things together? Because it gets too close to the real bosses in the Vatican, doesn't it? And the Jesuit order. We got to protect them just like we protect the mafia guys, the heads of the mafia. Now, he graduated in 1892. First in his class at the age of 14, he was accepted to enter the Orthodox Seminary of Tiflis in Tbilisi, Georgia, a Jesuit institution to be trained as a Jesuit priest. Oh, Lord, did we know that? In spite of contrary history written about the Jesuit-run seminary, the Jesuits remained in Russia territory after the order was banned by Alexander I in 1820. They remained there yes, they did. There were certain institutions. And this is one reason why they wanted to get back at the Tsar and the Russians, because they were kicked out. And they maintained control of several institutions, including the seminary where Stalin went at Tiflis. Stalin himself openly admitted the Jesuit control of the institution in his famous interview with Jewish journalist Emil Ludwig Cohen. And I bet you, if I said that to the CNN reporters, they go, oh, this is conspiracy theory. Can you prove that? Well, can you prove the things you put out there? God. So annoying. You know, I can prove it just as well as you can prove what you say. Ludwig, what impelled you to become an oppositionist? Stalin was asked. Was it perhaps bad treatment by your parents? Stalin, no. My parents were, listen to what he says, uneducated. But they did not treat me badly by any means. But it was a different matter at the Orthodox Theological Seminary, which I was attending, in protest against the outrageous regime of the Jesuitical methods prevalent at the seminary. I was ready to become, and actually to become, a revolutionary, a believer in Marxism, as a revolutionary teaching. Ludwig, but do you not admit that the Jesuits have good points? Now see how he talks against them. But he says something here. He says, yes, they are systematic and persevering in working to achieve their sordid ends. Their principal method is spying, prying, worming their way into people's souls, and outraging their feelings. What good can there be in that? For instance, in spying in the hostel. At 9 o'clock, the bell rings for morning tea. We go to the dining room and we return to our rooms. We find that meantime a search has been made and all our chests have been ransacked. What good point is that? Now, it's interesting. Let me check the time here because, we got enough for this. 3 minutes. Stalin, at Tiflis, Stalin's closest friend was fellow classmate Krikor Bedros Agajanian, the future Cardinal Agajanian, a powerful and ruthless Catholic cardinal who went to control death camps in Siberia under Stalin's rule. So Stalin, this guy's working for Stalin. Now Stalin, here's what he does. He must, and he's told by his Jesuit leaders, never make a connection to us, even talk against us. That's how they get away with this stuff. Come on, Lucy. So they get away with this stuff this way. And there are people out there that do the same thing in the media today. That talk against the Jesuits and the internet especially, that really are working with them. It's not uncommon. But guess what? When you ask yourself, where did Stalin go after when he was trying to be arrested for some of his activities prior to his control of the country, he hightailed it back to Tiflis, protected by the very people he talks against sometimes. And when he was put in jail for a while, then they got him out. Guess who got him out? Same people, and he ended up back protected by the Jesuits. So there's a lot of things here that you got to understand and how they operate before you can quickly come to CNN's opinion. See, they don't even want to talk about this stuff. They don't want to talk about our wars being orchestrated. It would basically cut into their mind. They'd be taken off the air. Another news agency and then none of these guys making millions of dollars like Anderson Cooper would have a job. And they really don't deserve that, but that's the world we live in. As a result, these events, they remain shrouded in history. But in the final week of his studies, having completed 7 years as a star pupil of the Jesuits, Stalin is variously claimed to have quit or been expelled. He wasn't. Neither account adequately explains how a seminary student of 7 years suddenly appeared influential and active in coordinating the Georgia Social Democratic movement less than 12 months later, an achievement that could not possibly have happened without substantial support. And where was that support? The Jesuit order, of course. That's a good place to drop off here. That's a good place. We only have 30 seconds anyway, so let's continue this tomorrow. Refresh your memory on the late Father Edmund Walsh and his connections to some of these real interesting figures in history. Stalin, Lenin, Eisenhower, FDR, who else? Hitler, and the rest of the boys. And Churchill, let's put him in the mix. We'll be back tomorrow on the Investigative Journal.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.